Seth, according to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, about 10% of children live with a parent with an alcohol use disorder. It's just tragic.
Pete, we hear this statistic all the time. At the end of the day, the courts don't care about the statistic. The courts care about keeping kids safe. And when I mean safe from a party who truly suffers from an alcohol disorder or is being wrongly accused of having alcoholism or some other alcohol disorder. It's easy and it saves you money. Instead of he said, she said, there's SoberLink.
SoberLink is fantastic, and they are a fantastic partner to this show. So what is SoberLink? SoberLink is a device. It's like a breathalyzer, but it is more. You blow into SoberLink whenever you want to prove in real time that you are safe to be with your kids at carpool, at drop-off, at handoff, whenever you're going to be driving. You blow into SoberLink. It uses facial recognition to prove that you were the one blowing at the time that you are taking the reading. It sends it off to the people who need to know. People involved directly in your case, not to be used for publication, not to be used for social media. This just goes to the people who matter most for your case as you are collecting data. SoberLink remote alcohol monitoring has helped over 500,000 people prove their sobriety and provide peace of mind during parenting time. And Seth, word on the street is courts love it.
Yeah, and it's not just when you're getting in a car. Let's be clear. People can say, never gotten a DUI. What's the issue? Well, the issue is once you're home at 5 o'clock and you're no longer driving, but you're going to start cooking and having a glass of wine, and that glass of wine turns into 2 bottles. That's now an issue. So it's not just getting in the car. It's when the children are in your care, custody, and control, are you focused on them and not using alcohol? Independent, third-party, real-time verification to support your case. I haven't been drinking. Here's the proof.
Those are the words that lawyers and courts love, but here are the words you're going to love. You can save $50 off your device and get started right away at soberlink.com/toaster. That's soberlink.com/toaster. Thank you to SoberLink for sponsoring this show. Hey, everybody, it's Pete. We are still on our little break here at the Toaster, and we're just resurfacing some of our favorite conversations from years gone by, and this week we've got a fun one. Rhonda Noordyk. You remember Rhonda Noordyk? She is the host of Divorce Conversations for Women podcast, helping women ask tough questions so that they get the answers they need to navigate the divorce process. Well, she's fantastic, and so we're resurfacing this episode from season 2. We've got a couple more weeks here, I think, before we get back into some new stuff. So thanks for your patience. Thanks for letting us have a vacation, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome to How to Split a Toaster, a divorce podcast about saving your relationships from True Story FM. Today we're taking on tough questions with a tough guest to help.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Seth Nelson, and we're here, as always, with my good friend Pete Wright and a special guest today, Rhonda Noordyk, host of Divorce Conversations for Women podcast and CEO of the Women's Financial Wellness Center. On her show, she helps women ask the tough questions so that they get the answers that they need to navigate the divorce process. Rhonda, welcome to the show.
Hey, Seth, thanks so much for having me.
That's so good, right? We put that in the script to demonstrate that we listen to you.
That's right.
Every word.
That's right.
Totally listen to you.
And let's just get it out there right now. How often do men actually listen?
I didn't even know I was setting you up for that, Seth.
And notice Rhonda didn't respond. She got real quiet, real
quiet. She doesn't need to say a word.
I know when to be quiet, believe it or not.
Rhonda, we're so glad to have you here, and your show is great, and it's such a fabulous resource. And we should say, full disclosure, Seth was just on your show a couple of weeks ago in December, episode 85, link in the show notes,
yes.
Talking about the world-famous Seth Nelson peace acronym. It's all about World famous trademark. Check your local jurisdiction piece. And
Right.
so we're here talking about your show, asking tough questions for women. Let's get this out of the way first, which is we try not to trap ourselves in too many gendered conversations. And we run into a lot of people for whom hard questions are hard questions, whether you're men, women, other. What's your experience in the show practically, where there are questions that are unique to women right now?
Yeah, I think that, women approach divorce differently. I think that the biggest thing is for them to say, "Hey, I don't really know where to start," right? And it's not that the questions themselves are necessarily different. I think it's just the way that they men and women approach the questions that's different, if that makes sense. So,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times the women that I'm working with, they have been contemplating divorce for years, sometimes decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay, well, now I think it's time. How do I know it's time? And where do I start? Like, that's probably the biggest question, right? Which is obviously backed by fear. I don't know where to start because I'm afraid of either what I'll find or the journey ahead or not knowing what I don't know and all of those kinds of things. So, and I think a lot of times people will ask, Rhonda, what about the guys? And I'm like, okay, first of all, right? Women's Financial Wellness Center does not hate men. Okay. However,
But then there's the however.
Yeah,
right?
right.
However,
It's carrying a lot of weight.
right. The however, though, is that I just love working with women, right? Because they're usually open and they recognize that they need guidance and help. They value, having a supportive team of people that come alongside and help them. So it's just, it's not to say that the guys don't need help because I think a lot of times they do. It's just that either A, they're not going to ask for help and they process that information and those questions differently. And secondly, like I'm one person, right? And I'm good, but like not that good. Like there's only so much bandwidth I have. And I'm just passionate about, helping the women.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I really appreciate how you dealt with that question in your approach, because from my experiences, I think a lot of what you said is true, is that generally women will approach this differently than men. And it's not that I don't have experience with dealing with men that are like, I don't know where to start. I've been contemplating this for years. I don't know the finances. I'm afraid of what I'm going to find. Like there will certainly be those, but there is, I believe, in my experiences, society where women will join together to support each other differently than how guys do it.
Yes.
And for whatever reasons that works in sociology is beyond me. I appreciate that happens. When we're dealing with finances, though, and where they are and everything we're going to talk about, is it fair to say for today, we're going to talk about it as if the woman doesn't know, but this applies to anybody, man or woman or other, that doesn't know about their finances or things they should be doing in their divorce process?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was curious on that point as you elaborate this whole idea that, what are the barriers between couples not being aware of the finances of the couple? Is it Seth and I were talking before the show, is it a professional thing, right? If you're an accountant or a business owner, you're going to know the numbers. Or is it even a generational thing, right? If you are over 50, do you have what would be traditionally, or I should say stereotypically gendered roles in the family where the, quote, husband does the books?
Right.
Kind of a thing. What's your experience with all that?
I think there's a couple things. One is certainly the professional aspect is huge. So I have a lot of clients whose husbands are financial advisors or financial analysts or, have positioned themselves professionally as knowing more about the finances because it's what they do. I think it's also how they're wired. And I always say, like, their love language is spreadsheets. Like, they come in and they're like, all right, I've got all this, like, the more spreadsheets, the more screens.
That is sexy. Let me tell you, that's a new website.
Oh, dear.
It's true.
My love language is spreadsheets.com. Swipe right for spreadsheets.
True. It's so true. And they use it, unfortunately, there's times when they will use that to intimidate. right? Because
Yeah.
they know that like the more chaos and confusion that they can provide for their spouse, the less likely they're going to ask really good questions.
Yeah.
I think there's a professional aspect, right, where the women feel intimidated.
Okay. Hold on one second. I have a confession to make.
Your love language is spreadsheets.
It's not, but I'm a nice Jewish boy. And I'm about to make a confession.
Oh, wait, let me get the nice Jewish boy theme song.
As most people who use Excel know, if you highlight a row of numbers, it will sum it at the bottom. Okay. And there'll be times I will say the same confession to the people that I do this to afterwards. But there are times where I will be working with people and I will highlight a row of numbers, lots of numbers, lots of zeros. And I'll say, oh, hold on, let me just add this up real quick. And I'll start saying something like, 1.23 million and 157,000, then 228, carry the one. And then I always carry the one. You got to always carry the one.
Carry
right?
the one. Of course.
And then I'll say it ends up being 3,475,284. And they're like, oh my God, you did that in your head. And I said, or it's the sum at the bottom. And I'm having a little fun.
You out yourself at the end. That's the problem because you can't see everybody. Is that Seth really closed his eyes like his brain hurt just now.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Seth,
See, Rhonda's going to steal it. She's going to steal it.
Title of show, Carry the One with Rhonda Noordyk.
Oh, I love that. So professionally, right there, I think there's a level of imbalance of power professionally because that's a big deal, right? And so that plays into, I think, the psychology on how women approach things. Like, oh, he's super smart. Like, I'll give you an example. So there was a lady that I was working with. And her husband owned, he was in politics and he was really well known in the community. And he was known for doing, building some new subdivisions, right? So he was in the construction industry as well. And so he put together something for her on a legal pad, right? Yellow legal pad, and writes down all of the things that they have, all the assets, and says, hey, here's a snapshot of what we have. So we go to do the attorney interviews and she brings this sheet, right? And she pushes it over to the attorney. And the attorney's like, okay, well, great start, but where's all the backup documentation? And this lady says, well, I mean, he's super smart. And I know that, he has, in full disclosure, I trust him, right? And she's like, listen, this guy's 55 years old. And if he really had his act together, he'd have more than $2 million of assets. And I'm like, right. But she had put him on such a pedestal that she felt totally comfortable with a legal pad with stuff. No. It could have totally been legit. I'm not opposed to that, right? But we need the backup documentation to verify the numbers on that pad of paper.
It's like Reagan said, right? Trust but verify.
100%. 100%, right?
Right.
So the professional aspect, I definitely think is part of it. I do think there's an aspect of bandwidth. Okay, we're going to divide and conquer, and nobody's sitting around singing Kumbaya about the finances. They're just not. Right? Everybody's kind of got their thing and you just, hey, they do their thing as a couple. And whether that's a generational aspect, I think there's sometimes that, but I think it just comes down to practicality as far as time.
Well, and it certainly sounds like that's the resource sort of, that's the piece of the puzzle that you fit. There is, it sounds like, a defensive aspect that says, you know what, I'm feeling so awash in this that I need someone just to help me feel a sense of control.
Absolutely.
Or, a sense of power again.
And I think along with that, Pete, is not being overwhelmed. That it is so overwhelming. You remember the episode we did where we listed out all the documents that you had to do in mandatory disclosures, where it went on and on and on in tax returns, and it's just nauseating. And that's so overwhelming. And so to have someone like Rhonda who helps people go through the process and say, we're just going to start gathering some information. And I'm not going to ask you to go get all your tax returns at one time and all your bank account statements and all of this and all of that. But we're just going to take it this week. We're going to get our tax returns. And how do I even get my tax returns? Well, you can go to the IRS and request your tax transcripts. You don't need your husband's permission. You don't need your wife's permission. All you need is that it's you and your social security number, and you can go to the IRS website and order your tax returns. They're called transcripts. Doing it one step at a time gives you a sense of empowerment. It gives you a sense that you're not overwhelmed, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment. Like, I haven't looked at my taxes in 10 years, and here I went and I got them, and now I'm going to work with someone and I'm going to give them this and say, in 10 minutes, I want you to explain to me my tax returns. I don't want to know every little detail. I don't need to know every little detail. I just need enough information to make an informed decision.
And I think it's the mindset piece around it too. Like, hey, listen, just because women haven't handled it, it doesn't mean that they're not capable of handling it. So there's this aspect of us saying, listen, you're smart, right? Like, with the right knowledge and the right experience, you're going to come out of this process potentially with more confidence than when you started, especially if, we're working with them through that process and taking those micro moments, like Seth said, to say, hey, let's just take a couple minutes and I want to share with you what you have here. And so it's not like, hey, let's turn on the fire hose and like, oh my gosh, there's all this info and I'm totally overwhelmed. It's just these small micro moments throughout throughout the divorce journey that they then come out of the other side feeling more confident about making, financial decisions.
Well, and maybe for the first time in their adult lives or ever, they know where their money is.
Yep.
They know where it's going, and they know what choices that they get to make.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about how you get into the process. Like, at what point are you engaged, or do you engage in the divorce process generally? Do the lawyers call you and bring you in? Do the wives themselves? Like, how does that work?
Normally, they reach out even before they've filed. So, when I first started my business after being in the financial industry 6 years ago, what I found was that a lot of times women in the midst of it, it was frustration around the process and not knowing what they didn't know and all that kind of stuff that they would call. When I launched the podcast 2.5 years ago, what I found was we were reaching more women who were in that contemplation stage who hadn't filed. So we've seen a shift in that. Most of the women reach out before they have filed. So we're actually sometimes the first person that they will reach out to.
See, that's something men wouldn't do.
No.
I'm thinking about it.
No.
I think I'll research and get my ducks in a row. Said no man ever.
Right. Right. Why are men lost in space? Because they refuse to ask for directions.
Right.
So we often get involved in the beginning and we will help them at that point, right? Start gathering that information. It's not uncommon if we're working with clients that they actually have all of their financial documentation and even their financial affidavit or financial disclosure done at the time that they file. The intern is like, what the heck did you guys do? Like, they're just prepared. And I think because we're able to be in the weeds a little bit more, right? Like, we can do a little more hand-holding throughout the process than maybe the attorneys are able to do, but we can come along and support what they're doing as part of the process.
And on that point though, Rhonda, from a lawyer's perspective, one of the things that is very difficult for all of our clients going through this is getting all of the documents, the financial documents together. And my paralegal, who is amazing, loves dealing with all those financial documents and working with our clients to get them. What she loves even more is when it all comes in a nice package and it's ribboned together, and she can actually do the initial analysis of, do I have all the documents that's required? What am I missing, if anything? And to dive in. And this is where the exploratory stage comes in. I always say it's like, Pete, we've talked about pieces of a puzzle, where you will have to look at that checking account and then you'll see a transfer to another number, like a savings account. And then you're like, wait a minute, do we have that savings account? It's right there. You just have to slow down and look.
Sure.
And when it comes in that nice package in a bow, all organized, that's where she can do it. And because it's not fun for anyone, the divorce process, but it's certainly not fun when we have to keep asking you for documents. So we'll have clients come in and say, we're going to meet with you for an hour and we're going to get online and we're going to get your passcodes and bring your phone so we can change your passcodes if you don't know them, so we can pull down some credit card statements. If we have to do that to help the client get there, great. But if they have someone like Rhonda who does that on the front end and they say, here you go, we saved the client a ton of money.
Yep.
We can now do the legal analysis that we
Yes.
need to do.
Yes. And I think that's important, Seth, is, the seeing the value, right? As clients are going through this process, there's a couple areas, right? There's the legal, the financial, and the emotional, and making sure that people, women in particular, right, have all three of those areas working together. It allows everybody to focus on their strengths, right? And bring the best possible value that we can to our clients.
Okay, let's do a little visioning exercise. Given what you just said and how you work with lawyers, I'm a new client for you. How do you set me up for my experience in working through this incredibly challenging thing, right? I'm just coming into your office. I'm confused. I don't know which end is it. That's pretty much true. Like we're not really delving into fantasy land here. I'm generally a confused person. And so how do you set me up in what I can expect in working with my my attorney and the legal system vis-a-vis the finances?
Are you asking questions like, do you know about your finances? What do you know? What don't you know? Do you want to keep the house if you can afford it? Are you kind of having those conversations, not from a legal perspective on whether or not from a legal perspective they're entitled to keep the house? That's you're going to give to the lawyer, right?
Yes. So I'm asking questions like, what's their biggest challenge? What's the thing that's keeping them up at night related to the finances? What do they know about the finances? A little bit about like the equity in their home and a general idea of what they have as far as retirement assets, if they've been working, if their husband, what his role is he getting, a base salary plus bonuses? Like those are the kinds of like financial related questions that are really important for us because it's going to help us make the right recommendation.
So I want to get back to my question. I want to reposition a little bit because I think this is really important. I'm terrified of the law. Help me not be terrified of the legal process. That's what I want to hear.
I'm going to rephrase your question a little bit. Pete's a client coming to you, afraid of the law, but forget about the lawyer for a minute. They're afraid about not knowing their finances. They're about to go through a divorce. You might be able to find a good lawyer for them. You might not, because that might be in whatever, Oklahoma, where you don't know anybody. So if you have a client coming to you from Oklahoma who's about to go through a divorce, you know no lawyers in Oklahoma, how are you going to help that client who's terrified because they know nothing about their finances, step by step? What do you do to help that person?
I want to feel safe. I want you to help me find a way to feel safe.
Well, I think one of the first things, right, is listening to them, right? And creating this opportunity to say, hey, listen, you're going to have a safe space for us to have a conversation confidentially, right? So that's the first thing. The first practical thing that we're going to do related to the finances is we're going to actually help them understand their income and expenses. Why? Because the budget, as much as it's not sexy or glamorous, it is the foundation for every single conversation we're going to have from this point forward, which is, Rhonda, can I keep the house? I don't know. Right? How much should I be spending? How much can I afford for health insurance each month? I don't know. Like there's all these I don't know questions, right? I don't know the answers to those until we have a really clear picture and really a lifestyle analysis, right? Of what are the current expenses? What have they been spending as a couple, as a household family? How much does it cost to run the household? But then also taking a look at, okay, if and when, right, you're going to be splitting, let's look at the expenses that you would have as an individual.
I know that there are listeners out there that would be like, oh my God, where do I find all of this information? So a couple things that I'm asking whether you advise them to do or you help them with. Do you have them run a credit report?
Yes.
Pulls up all of their credit, what's out there. So at least we know there's a mortgage, there's credit cards, there's a car payment. You start there.
Yes.
And once you see that, do you then say, okay, just like, here we go, Pete. I think we talked about this in an earlier show. What's in your wallet, right? What credit cards are there? Right. And let's pull those statements. Very few people deal with cash all the time now, right? So do you help them analyze their credit card statements?
Yes.
To figure out their budget and what they've been spending?
Yes, and so the bank statements.
Simple things, right? So 3 things they can do. They can pull their credit report at, I think, myfreecreditreport.com. They can look in their wallet and see what credit cards they have, and they can go to their bank and get their bank statements. And that for you, would that be like an amazing start for a client that has no idea where to start?
Yes, and I've had clients who will say, "Hey, my husband locked me out. I can't get onto my online banking to pull my statements." I'm like, "Well, the good news is you're on the account, right? So you can go down to the bank, and then they walk out with a stack of they have the bank, print those for them."
Right, right.
So yeah, I mean, those are really some key practical things, and then we can take that information and start to make sense of it and put together, their budget and looking at that. And I was going to mention, I think a practical example of how this is important is, again, back to that question of like, hey, should I keep the house or not? And we look at the budget and we look at the income and we rely on the attorneys to say, hey, can you just give us a basic, calculation on child support or alimony, just for the purposes of helping them try to get their head around what's coming in, and what's going out. And then we can say, hey, listen, based on some of these preliminary numbers, I don't know that it's going to make sense for you to keep the house. However, here's what we can say would be a healthy range for you as you're going out to maybe look for an apartment, for example, right? And what that does is it allows women to go and say, hey, I scheduled a couple appointments, I looked at a couple places. Yeah, they were actually pretty nice, versus them going and saying, well, this is X amount of dollars a month. I don't know if I can afford this, so I'm not going to make a decision. And maybe I should be living in like a one bedroom efficiency in a crappy neighborhood, or maybe I could afford more than what I realized that so it empowers them on the spot where they could actually make a decision.
And Rhonda, just before that, even if I love your example, because I think it's absolutely right. Like, hey, what's our range of what we might be able to expect? It's going to be a broad range till the lawyer gets all the information, does all the analysis. You can get little bits along the way. And I always say, look, I'm not even going to get you in the ballpark. I might get you in the parking lot of the ballpark. Don't hold me to it, but we're going to start narrowing this range.
Right.
But also, in your example, which I do appreciate, that you said, okay, I can't afford the house. That was an assumption you made for your example. But sometimes when you're going through the divorce process, it might be you can afford to keep the house, but you're not going to have any retirement. And I can help clients make those choices about what they get in a divorce process. What I cannot do as the lawyer, and I am asking Rhonda if this is what she does for her clients, is this, Rhonda, do you say you could be house poor, or you could get a smaller living, but you're going to have this in retirement. And if you have this amount in retirement at this age over this many years, this is what it's going to look like in 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Yes.
You do that analysis with them?
Yes, we can do that. And I'm also looking at cash, right? So like there's those couple different buckets, right? So you've got the house living, you've got the retirement, and then you also have the cash bucket, which there's been plenty of times where people are like, well, I can get the house. Great. But yes, you have retirement assets, but you're years away from 59 and a half. So you can't access that money in theory, right? We could talk about some ways that they could, but in theory, they can't access that money unless the money's quadroed, right? Until 59 and a half. So you have zero cash. And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I never thought of that, right?
So she said a legal term there, Pete. I got to jump in because I know.
Would you please?
Quadro.
We need to get somebody get the dictionary. Mr. Black.
Qualified domestic relations orders. Just what everyone wants to talk about.
That's right.
So cool.
And it gets better, Pete. It falls under ERISA, which is a federal law. Gasp.
Yes.
So here's the very brief nutshell on this, and then we're just going to move on because we really want to talk about how we can help people get through and understand their finances. But if a spouse has a retirement plan that's governed by federal law, okay, not an IRA. Think of a 401k, think of a pension. In let's say the husband has it and it's got $100,000 in it and the wife is entitled to half of it. If you get what's called a qualified domestic relations order that says half of that retirement or 401k is going to go to the wife can then open up a new 401k and take half of that money from the husband's, put it in the wife's. There's no tax consequence.
Okay.
Pete, if you take out half of your 401k now, you're getting hit with taxes and penalties and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
When you have a quadro by definition, by a divorce, and you split that in half, there's no tax consequence on that transfer from husband to wife. Okay.
Okay.
Later, if you decide to pull the money out, there will be taxes, and depending on when you do it, there could be penalties. But people get very, very concerned. But if I take half the retirement, I'm going to have to pay taxes on that. You do not if you
No,
haven't.
they've thought
They
of
have
that.
thought of
Right.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Okay. So it's all the same. It's the same tax consequences when you pull it out later. It's like it's just a plain split.
It's
just a split.
The government will take nothing of it at that time. The government's always going to get their piece later. Let's be honest about that.
They will. No, they're just swimming. They're just swimming around with mouths agape. That's all they're doing. They're just waiting to bite.
And what I always say is it's like you take the one molecule and you divide it into two, right? So it's just like the splitting, right? But people can take, those retirement funds, right? There's an opportunity for them to take it without, they still have to pay taxes, but they can forego the penalty as long as they're prior to it going into an IRA. Right. So there's this window where if they did need cash, right, it's a qualifying event and they can take it out. And again, to your point earlier, Seth, it's not that, we're advocating to say, hey, take retirement funds, right? Like, again, there needs to be this long-term planning as well. But there have been specific situations where women need access to some cash temporarily, and it can be an option, for them to access some of them.
And that's basically what Rhonda does for clients. Is like, hey, there are different options out here, but talk to your lawyer about what you're legally allowed to do, not allowed to do, what you can do. But having a good team around you when you go through this process is, I think, vitally important. And I know we're not talking about it today, but Pete, we've talked about in the past where we send clients to see mental health counselors. You're going through a divorce. Go talk to someone that in that hour, half hour, 45-minute session, they are 100% focused on you. It's not your friends. It's not your family. They have no vested interest in this, worried about seeing the grandkids or what have you. So having a financial planner that, if they're good and they have your financial interest at heart and not making the commission on the front end when there's a better product to put you in that they don't make money off until the back end, there's all those things. You got to vet people. But when you have good people that are willing to work with you and give you different perspectives for you, the listener, the client, the person going through the divorce, you are the decision maker. And I think we cannot lose sight of that. All these professionals should be giving advice and counsel, and you should then feel as if you have enough information to make the decision. And if you're saying to any of these people, I don't know, you decide, I think you need to check yourself.
Ultimately, we're coming in to say, hey, listen, let's make sure that you're asking the right questions so you get the right answers and you feel empowered to make good financial decisions, along the way.
Sure. As we get to wrapping up here, I think we have two areas of resources I think that we can talk about. The first one, as Seth already talked about, get a counselor. When you think about building the team, are you in a position, do you find yourself in a position to recommend other resource professionals that you say have to be on your divorce team after you've filled that spot of financial planning, financial wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually quite a few people. Obviously, the attorneys, the mental health professionals are really important. I will also encourage people to reach out to a real estate agent, especially if they need to have a fair market value or an analysis done on their home, an appraisal done on their home, so we can get some information regarding that. Mortgage professionals. The mortgage professionals can also help run detailed credit reports. A lot of times we can get them to do them at no cost, and they can do a really detailed credit report as well. Health insurance experts, so people that can help look at the different options regarding COBRA and the marketplace and independent insurance. Also, the life insurance folks, as far as just running some quotes on pricing for that. So yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. We also have referred out to car dealerships, right? Because women are like, yeah, the van's like on life support and I need some help. I am looking at kind of the whole process and saying, okay, who do we need to pull in? And it's not, hey, here's a number of somebody. I'm actually like, let's get on the phone right now and see, so let's get a quote on the health insurance right now. Let's schedule an appointment with this person right now. So we're kind of helping move things along to get the information that we need in addition to, just the financial stuff.
it's a great set of resources, things to think about. And I don't know, Seth, did you have any holes that you would want to add in there?
I thought that list of professionals on all different avenues for financial issues was a great list, because it covered all the different aspects that people are going to be concerned about. And hey, I'm on my spouse's insurance. When I get divorced, I'm not allowed to be. How much will it cost? Am I going back to work? Can I get it through my employer? But if not, what is in the open marketplace? That's a great question that should be asked and be looked at early. If I need life insurance, who do I talk to? How much is that? So I thought that list was just spot on. And I really appreciate you sharing that with our listeners, Rhonda.
Yeah, thank you.
Rhonda, let's do the plug part. Tell us about your podcast, your business. Where do you want people to go to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So Divorce Conversations for Women is our podcast, iTunes, iHeartRadio, but they can go to our website, wfwcdivorce.com. They can listen to the podcast, they can read blog articles, but they can also book a one-on-one appointment. So we offer a free 30-minute confidential consultation. I handle all of those. So they will be talking to me directly, and they can book a free 30-minute time slot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Rhonda. We so appreciate you.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda.
It's a pleasure.
Fantastic
Thanks,
resources.
Seth. This was awesome. I appreciate it.
Yep. Take care.
And thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. We appreciate your time and attention. On behalf of Rhonda Noordyk and Seth Nelson, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next week right here on How to Split a Toaster, a divorce podcast about saving your relationships.
Seth Nelson is an attorney with NLG Divorce and Family Law with offices in Tampa, Florida. While we may be discussing family law topics, How to Split a Toaster is not intended to, nor is it providing legal advice. Every situation is different. If you have specific questions regarding your situation, please seek your own legal counsel with an attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction. Pete Wright is not an attorney or employee of NLG Divorce and Family Law. Seth Nelson is licensed to practice law in Florida.